This is Dave at AFX Search, licensed investigators in Palm Beach, Florida. For potential clients, the question comes up, how do you locate a person when there's difficulty in finding out where they are? The first thing on a person locate or missing person is to find out what is the nature of why they're unable to be contacted. First of all, is it a long lost contact that's maybe a relative that's disappeared over the years? Is it an heirship or adoption issue where it's also a relative or somebody that's there's a lot of distance in time between now and when that person was last in contact? Is the person a fugitive who's actively trying to not be found? For example, a process server or a criminal, or even a person who's a debtor who's making themselves hard to find for creditors. Is it a missing person, a relative or a business associate who is actually gone missing or even abducted? Once the nature of the dislocation is determined, the next thing is the investigator will look at the last known contact. That's, of course, an obvious starting point, but there's usually not going to be much information there. If there was, the client would have found that out already, or you would have found that out already. Finding out what their activity patterns are is a valuable first step. You're not going to find these on a database. There are a lot of private databases where you can look up addresses or utility bills. For a missing person, that kind of activity is not going to show up on a database. It's a matter of a manual labor process of a professional, experienced investigator looking at their habits, their jobs, business licenses, what their pursuits are in life, what their hobbies are in life, and then finding where those intersect with each other to see if there's a pattern of that with a person in another location. A clever interview of known associates can also lead to maybe unknown associates. You talk to a business partner, you talk to a close friend, you talk to a relative. Former relationship partners are good sources of information. Even when you look at applications for leases or applications for vehicles, the subject will often put on those documents associates or nearest relative, or in case of emergency, contacts. Those contacts probably aren't going to say, yeah, this guy's sitting right next to me, but they may be a source of who else do they know, who did they used to hang around with, what type of habits do they have that may not be obvious to the client or the person looking to find this missing person. Email contacts are valuable. If there's a way to reach out to the person by email or to find out where they're communicating online, that can create an electronic footprint of IP addresses, locations, general geographic locations of where the person might be. In missing persons cases, there are always habits and associations a person has with different online resources. It may be a forum for special interest groups, for, let's say, four-wheeling, or it might be knitting, or it might be bird watching. And if you can find things that that person's interested in and then find locations where people have that type of association or discussion online, that can lead to locating the person. If a person has a certain username they like to use for email addresses, birdwatcher123. We often look for different ISP providers. Instead of at Gmail, you look for it at AOL. You look for variations of those names. Again, these are just some very basic starting points for locating a missing person. Usually the harder they're trying to hide their location, the more activity they need to take to do that. Each one of those activities is a data point to find out where they are. We had a subject that was actively trying to avoid process service, and in doing so was hiding out in warehouses and traveling and sleeping in trailers. Each one of those activities created an inflection point, an activity point where they would travel. That created an inflection point. If they sent an email to book a reservation, that created an inflection point. And each travel also involved associating with other people, and each one of those other people was a source of information of where that person was. And come to find out, that was the solution to the case, and finding out where that person was. Not tracking where their location was, but tracking what kind of activity they undertook. And at some point, that activity grew together to point exactly where they were located, and we were able to effect successful process service where 4 or 5 other process servers were not able to. So locating a person involves a lot of different layers. A lot of it is manual labor process, interviewing, tracking down activities, not looking for a specific location, but looking for activities and associations which can filter down to that location.